Welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to talk about fallacies, and it's going to be a fun day, I promise. Let's jump into the material. Fallacies is when logic goes awry. Faulty logic, in other words. Sometimes they are called non sequiturs because what you're saying follows does not follow. So this Latin for sequence, it's not the right sequence. Basically, a fallacy is a mistake in reasoning. And when an argument is fallacious, it is not valid. A fallacious argument is invalid. It's one where the conclusion does not follow from the premises. We have illogic, faulty logic, bad logic. There are two different kinds of fallacies, formal and informal. Today, we are going to talk about a whole litany, a whole batch of different kinds of informal fallacies. But before we get into those, let me quickly tell you what a formal fallacy is. And let's start with an example. Suppose I argue as follows. If Steph Curry makes these free throws, then the Warriors will win the game. Second premise, the Warriors won. So if I conclude from that Curry must have made those free throws, I will have argued poorly. That argument is actually bad. It's invalid. The logic doesn't work if you think about it. And the defect of the logic stems from the structure or the form of the argument itself and not so much its content. So why exactly does this argument not work? Well, just because the Warriors won the game doesn't necessarily mean that Curry made those free throws. Maybe he missed them, and then the Warriors did something else to secure the victory. Maybe Klay Thompson hit a three-pointer at the right moment, and that's why they won, in spite of Curry missing those free throws. If the premise had read, the only way the Warriors can win is if Curry makes these free throws and they won the game, well, then yes, he must have made them. But we don't have that premise. We don't have an only in here. That one word changes the statement entirely. It almost kind of flips it on its head. We're basically saying, here's a way the Warriors can win. It's not the only one. Here's a way. And if the Warriors win, maybe it was through that way, but maybe it was through another way. If you look at the structure of this argument, it has the following form. There's a premise that is a conditional statement. It's an if-then statement. If A, then B. If blank, then some other blank. In this case, Steph Curry makes the free throws, fills in the first blank, and they win the game as the second blank. And there's another premise that is what we put in the second blank. So let me annotate here. Let's do this. So the form of this argument, it has two premises. One of the premises, doesn't really matter which, is an if-then statement. If, say, A, then B. And then there's another premise that's just what's in the second blank, what follows the then, the B. And then the conclusion So we'll say, therefore, A, which is the first blank here, which was the condition. And it turns out that irrespective of what statements you put in for A and B, the argument will end up being fallacious. It'll end up being invalid because this form is invalid. I hope that makes sense. In other words, you don't even have to know about the content. You don't have to know about the, did he make who's Steph Curry? Did he make these free throws? It doesn't even matter how you fill this in. The problem is with the order or the structure of the form itself. That's what makes it bad in this case. Or you can tell that it's bad just from the form alone without even looking at what exactly is going on. Okay, let's clear all these drawings. Okay. So I hope that was clear. Let's look at this argument. The Brooklyn Bridge is made of atoms. That's true, isn't it? I mean, everything on Earth is made of atoms. I mean, unless there's like maybe vacuums or maybe there's some like energy things that there's waves and not particles, but things like bridges are made out of material, concrete and metal and whatnot. And that material is made out, has some molecular structure, and those molecules have atoms. And it's made up of atoms. Atoms, second premise, atoms are invisible. You can't see them. They're not visible to the naked eye. Therefore, since the Brooklyn Bridge is made out of invisible stuff, it too must be invisible. Therefore, the Brooklyn Bridge is invisible. The conclusion is ridiculous. And in some sense, you might be misled to think that we've proven that the Brooklyn Bridge is invisible. But this argument, while it's funny and it might kind of make you think it works for a second, it doesn't work. The logic there is defective. It's an invalid argument. However, you cannot tell that it's valid just from the form or the structure alone. You have to actually consider the content of these statements. So the form alone is not fallacious, as it says. You have to look at what each of these says. So it turns out that this is a specific kind of informal fallacy, which is the fallacy of composition. Just because a thing, just because the parts of something have a certain quality, namely being invisible, that doesn't mean that the entirety of the thing, the whole, also has that quality. The parts are invisible. That doesn't mean the whole thing is invisible. Sometimes that's the case, right? Every part of the Brooklyn Bridge weighs less than the planet Earth, right? If you measure any little part you want, it could be like this half or that half, or it could be like this atom or that atom. Every single part of the Brooklyn Bridge weighs less than the planet Earth. And in fact, the Brooklyn Bridge as a entirety whole thing also weighs less than the Earth. So sometimes that's true, but not always. And this is an exception to that. So this is an example of the fallacy of composition. And you can't just look at the structure. So if we looked at the structure, if we tried to abbreviate or generalize the premises like we did up here, we would have something like this. There's no if-then statement here. In one system we're going to learn, this would just be we call it maybe to say B, or like A for made of atoms, or B for the Brooklyn. We're going to abbreviate this whole It's just a statement. Brooklyn Bridge is made out of B. The second premise is some other statement, maybe call it A. And then the third statement kind of looks like, is it kind of like B or A, sort of, but really it's its own statement. Brooklyn Bridge is invisible. And some arguments that have this structure will be valid, some will be invalid. So you can't say just from this information that it is invalid. So that means it must be an informal, not a formal fallacy, must be informal. Okay, let's get into the informal fallacies. They're a lot of fun. You'll see. And let's start this one with an example. And here I have a YouTube video that might move you. In fact, it says, if this doesn't move you, then check your pulse, it says. Well, let me make sure the sound is right. Share computer sounds. And gosh, should I also share? I'm going to do optimize share screen for video clip. I think this makes the video better too. All right. Yeah, so you see this cute puppy, this cute girl, they have this connection. You're already like kind of crying. You're like, I want that puppy now too. So we as human beings, we are moved by reason. And so I have this image that kind of things that seem logical and things we figured out with reason. It's kind of black and white. And we are also, well, it's actually a philosophical question if we can be moved solely by reason. But when we make this, we can make some decisions that are very calculative and based in reason, at least in part. And then we can be very motivated, very powerfully motivated by our emotional side of our psychology. And we have this passional, instinctual side of our psychology that might be even deeper, more deeply seated in an evolutionary sense. And, we make metaphors about it hits me in the hits all the feels and the heart and the gut, and it's guttural and it's visceral and it's moving, and I have tears. And so a lot of these informal fallacies are going to be appeals to emotion. And so this first one is exactly that. It's an appeal to pity. So we pity this dog. It seems unfair that it's kind of locked up in this cage, and that doesn't seem right. And so when we act out of pity in the face of reason, like only out of pity, or we do something not because it's logical, but because we're moved by pity, then we have to be aware of that. So this can lead us into a defective argument, we can call appeal to pity. A lot of these fallacies have a long history, so long that they were studied centuries ago, and everything had these Latin names. So here's a fun Latin name for appeal to pity: argumentum ad misericordiam. That's pretty cool. Misericordiam, appeal to pity. So maybe so let's say if you went out and you got this dog, maybe there are a lot of good reasons why you shouldn't take this dog home, right? You can't afford it, or you don't have the space for it, or you're allergic to dogs, but then you get it anyway. You kind of did this irrational thing and you were moved by pity. So this happens when, and the arguer might be a voice in your head. The arguer attempts to support a conclusion by merely evoking pity from the reader or listener. 6 period here. So I'm trying to convince you of something like, or I get convinced myself, like, get this dog. And I haven't really given you any good reasons. I've just moved you by pity. If we replace pity, we have an appeal to, if we replace pity with fear, then we have an appeal to fear, which is also known as fear mongering or scare tactics. So instead of attempting to support a conclusion by evoking pity, we'll be evoking fear. We've got a couple political ads that did just that. So let's look at this first one here.
Pledged to defund its police department by 50%, even including a proposal to remove 911 dispatchers from police control.
Joe Biden said he's absolutely on board with defunding the police. Listen closely.
Yes, absolutely.
Hello, you've reached 911. I'm sorry that there is no one here to answer your emergency call, but leave a message and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.
Crime will rise significantly.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
Okay, so what's going on here? Well, a picture is painted of, if you vote for this one candidate, then this scary thing will happen. We're going to look at a fallacy called straw man or straw figure fallacy, where you distort or you twist another person's words or argument. And there's the whole it was dominating the news, about police and police reform and defund the police and what that means and who supported it. And, typically people who lean right will be more supportive of defense, military, police, and people who lean left maybe are a bit more leery of the police. And, so Biden, I forget exactly what his platform was on this, but he might have said, yes, we need to defund the police, or to a certain extent, or maybe called for police reform, or maybe there was some soundbite. And so that was a political tactic to kind of use, like, oh, Democrats are saying we should defund the police. And so what that means is that there will be no police. You call 911, like there'll be some evil person taking advantage of this poor old lady who's vulnerable, and you call 911 and you're sorry, you're out of luck. And so that might scare people into believing something, into accepting a conclusion like you should vote for, some other political candidate. All right, let's see. This is another one. This is clips from a Republican convention a couple of years ago. So let's check this one out.
Biden's America.
It's a horror film, really.
You won't be safe in Joe Biden's America.
Your family will not be safe.
They want to steal your liberty, your freedom.
Nightmares are becoming real.
Joe Biden is not a savior of America's soul. He will be the destroyer of American greatness.
He's a Trojan horse with Bernie, AOC, Pelosi, Black Lives Matter, and his party's entire left wing.
Joe Biden is basically the Loch Ness Monster of the swamp.
They will force the choice between being obedient to God or to Caesar, because the radical left's God is government power.
They will demolish the suburbs, confiscate your guns, and appoint justices who will wipe away your Second Amendment and other constitutional freedoms.
They'll disarm you, empty the prisons, lock you in your home.
They want to control what you see and think.
And invite MS-13 to live next door. And the police aren't coming when you call, or there is no place to run.
They want to enslave you to the weak, dependent, liberal, victim ideology to the point that you will not recognize this country or yourself.
This misinformation system keeps people mentally enslaved to the ideas they deem correct.
The vengeful mob that seeks to destroy our way of life.
The forces of anarchy and communism.
Violent anarchists and agitators and criminals.
Poisoning our schools and burning our cities.
Okay, we don't have to watch all 3 minutes of it. So I think you get the point. Basically, if you vote a certain way, a lot of scary things will happen. You know, lock you in your house. There'll be no police. You won't be safe. Another thing I'll point out is what often happens with these informal fallacies that appeal to the non-rational sides of our psychology. They don't have to be purely an appeal to some emotion, whether it be pity or fear. A lot of times, maybe most of the time, it's a little bit of both, or maybe it's 80-90% an emotional ploy and 10-20% there is some logical, rational basis to the claims. So again, you might have a distortion or an exaggeration. So to use the example I gave before is maybe somebody on the left argues for some kind of police reform, you know. So, you know, news stories came out, this is years ago now, and it still might be happening, that many police departments were getting like military, like war grade equipment, you know, like armor and like not like almost a tank, or it seemed like they were almost like full on like SWAT team level equipment and weapons and armor and masks and vehicles, etc. And so some people looked at that and there's a couple points. One is that a good use of public funds? Like if there is enough danger, maybe if there's enough threat, maybe, you know, like the SWAT team probably does need to be called for certain things, you know, like if some crazy person is like holding children hostage or something, right? Yeah, maybe you want something like a SWAT team with all that cool gear, but you imagine it's got to be quite costly, that stuff. Is it overkill? And then also, you know, pensions, and then just tactics of, you know, what, you know, do you use a taser? Do we need guns? Should we just use more de-escalation techniques, etc.? I mean, you know, of course, you what's cool about this type of course is you get to, you know, this isn't, hey, run this direction or that direction. Just be aware of these certain things that impact us at this psychological level that affects our rationality, and keep that in mind as you move forward in the world. And so, you know, people on the left, they might say, hey, maybe let's like rethink or kind of change like how much funding and then what we're funding, you know, because we want no police. That would be that would be tough if there were no police. I mean, we have all these rules and laws, and it would be nice if we could follow these rules without any enforcement, but it doesn't look like that's possible. So we need some sort of enforcers. And so, you know, reforming the police is one thing, but then if you kind of twist that and then defund the police, and does that mean like, does defund mean, you know, reduce it by 10%, 50%, 100%? Those are all different positions. And you could easily kind of say, like, you could twist someone's words, and you might say, oh, you vote for this person, there will be no police. And then you get the granny who's getting robbed. And then, I don't know, what killed or something later. Okay, so that's appeal to fear. All right. Let's go to the next one. Appeal to tradition. Do you have a good reason to do or believe something, or are you merely just keeping it going because of tradition? If it's solely based on tradition, you got to be careful, because it's not that traditions are in and of themselves bad. And in fact, they might be an integral part of society. If you got rid of all traditions, that might start to undermine society. But just because something is a tradition and has been part of the social fabric for X amount of time, that doesn't automatically mean that it should continue. So here are some examples. You're justifying something solely based on tradition. Okay, so being deceitful and lying is prima facie, at first blush, other things being equal, morally bad. And lying to children is extra bad, maybe. But a lot of people who celebrate kind of the Santa side of Christmas, of course, not everyone, but a lot of people, they, tell this kind of story, this myth of Santa. And like to a lot of children, it's like literally true. It's not just a story or a myth. It's actually true that there's this actual person who flies around the world in one night and delivering presents to children. So it's arguably at least telling kids a falsehood. You are doing it knowing that it's not true. So you could argue that it's a lie. Yeah, maybe it's a white lie. So white lie is a lie. Maybe it's a little bad, but it's not as bad as like, it's a romantic partner asks you, like, where were you last night? And you were, I don't know, being unfaithful somewhere, and you say, oh, I was working late. Right? Okay. That's not a white lie. That's a bad lie. But and you ask people, well, is it morally okay to keep, to tell the story of Santa to children in a way, and you're saying this isn't a story, this is real? Is that okay? And if the person just says, hey, it's a tradition, and that's all they said, then you've got an appeal to tradition. Then that's fallacious. Or think about hazing in fraternities. So that's been in the news sort of recently because it's gotten a bit out of hand, and there's been alcohol poisoning, like maybe even someone died from but if you don't know what hazing is, so like a fraternity is like it is a club essentially for men who go to a certain college, and there are chapters that there are these boys clubs or fraternities, clubs for guys that have a long tradition, and they kind of have they have used kind of, has supposedly some kind of ties to Greek culture, and they have these Greek names, the Greek letters, and Phi, Beta, Kappa, Sigma, Nu, Pi, all these kind of Greek names. And it's very attractive to young people because, you want friends and brotherhood and deep relationships and maybe connections after you graduate. And there's and then of course all the fun and the partying. That might be the most attractive thing, to a young 18, 19-year-old. But then how do you glue these people together? How do you get these people so close? Well, if you have to do something challenging or dangerous or scary or kind of goofy and funny, you can bring people together. But if you take it too far, it's like maybe you have to walk around in a diaper with like a little pacifier. Okay, that's kind of fun. You're in your dorm. That's kind of funny. Or play a drinking game where you get kind of drunk, take a few shots, and then you're kind of out of it. But if you take it too far, people get alcohol poisoning or vandalize property, hurt other people. And then if the defense is, look, we've been doing this hazing for, 50 years in this fraternity, it's just the way it is, that's an appeal to tradition. Circumcision is an interesting one. So a lot of people think maybe it's time to rethink this. Should we just call it what it is, genital, or some people say it's genital mutilation, removing the foreskin, cutting it off. Why do we do that? If someone said like, well, some people, they might admit that there's something peculiar about it and maybe a bit barbaric, and talk of things, it being kind of helping with more sanitary or clean, or whatever, or there's even reports of it can help with preventing transmission of STIs, etc. Okay, so it's an empirical claim, and you'd have to look into that, how much of that is legit. And then you have to look at the cons, right? Are there nerves there? Are you losing sensation? And is it kind of you're cutting a baby, an infant, and it's irreversible? And you ask a lot of parents, or fathers in particular, and you say, like, you kind of see that there's, if you do the argument, the pros and the cons, that it seems like this is weighing a certain way, and they might say, yeah, rationally, I do think that it's weird and barbaric, and you're right, the cons are very, very high. And then the follow-up question is, so are you going to circumcise your son? And they say, yeah, I am. And it's like, what? Why? It's like, well, I want them to look like me. I guess it's a little bit of a reason, or like, it's a long tradition. Like, this is just the way it is. You're not relying so much on logic and reason. It's just a tradition, and that's rooted more in this part of our psychology. Don't see the bride. This is a tradition. Oh, it's bad luck. Why do people do that? Well, it's just a tradition. People will follow this tradition of asking their partner's father, can I take your daughter's hand in marriage? Do I have your permission? And so a lot of people today think that's outdated, and issues there. But if your only defense is it's a tradition, then you've fallen victim to this. Looks like someone took a class like this and they had to make a video, which would be an interesting assignment for you guys. This has like 8 likes. I don't know how many views it has. I don't know if it says, but I just think this actually does a pretty good job.
Babe, I'm starving. Let's get some Chinese food.
But it's Friday night.
Yeah?
What do we always do on Friday night? We go get Mexican on Friday night.
Okay, why can't we just get Mexican tomorrow night and let's get Chinese tonight?
We've always done Mexican on Friday nights. It's done every week. Why would we change something that's not broken?
Sometimes I think you love Mexican more than you love me.
Maybe.
What?
I love that last little ending. That's pretty funny. Yeah. So he's not saying like, hey, Mexican, we actually, it's better, it's cheaper, maybe it's healthier. Those would all be like valid reasons. It's just, this is what we do. This is tradition. We always get Mexican. So that's appeal to tradition. Okay, let's move on. We spent a lot of time on that. Ad hominem. This is where you maybe talking with someone, debating with someone, have an alleged argument with someone, and then instead of replying to a point or their argument, you just you revert to insults. A lot of times you're kind of backed into a corner. You kind of realize that they're kind of winning the debate, winning the arguments, and it's kind of a last ditch effort to kind of have some sort of comeback. But it's really a cheap move, and you just kind of make fun of them or insult them. One of my favorite shows for a long time was The Office. And so I have a lot of examples of these fallacies from that show. So the Dwight character, played by Rainn Wilson, there's an episode where they're on a booze cruise. And Michael, of course, is having a bad time. And so Michael's the boss. And Dwight says, oh, to Michael, oh, you seasick? Like, again, because he looks kind of seasick or bummed out. Oh, Captain Jack says, you should look at the moon. And instead of, replying to that's kind of an argument. The conclusion, you should look at the moon if you're seasick. Let's see, the argument would go something like, premise, you are seasick. Premise 2, if you are seasick and you want it, premise 2, you don't want to be, you are seasick. Premise 2, you don't want it, you want to stop the sickness. Premise 3, if you are seasick and you want it to stop, then you should look at the moon. So therefore you should look at the moon. That would be kind of the reasoning here. And instead of addressing it like, oh, that's an old wives' tale, that's actually not true, that's a misconception, or like I tried that, didn't work. Instead of addressing what he's saying, he's like, Captain Jack is a fart face. It just kind of doesn't like this Captain Jack guy. Earlier in the episode, he just wanted to have the microphone and do the dance in the limbo, and the captain is just not having any of his antics. So that's ad hominem. Here's another one from The Office. So Jim, kind of the second in command, the sort of the hero of the show in a sense, or the super likable, love interest of Pam, the secretary. He ends up being promoted to the same level as Michael, and they're co-managers, and they have to make a decision about raises. There's only a certain amount of money for raises for the office, and they have to figure out how to dole them out in the most fair way. And they're getting in an argument, and Jim's like, you're not really listening to me, and I'll just read through it. So Jim says to Michael, I don't think you're good at making tough decisions. Michael says, at thinking out the options and then stating that decision very clearly, especially when it's an unpopular decision. Okay, so Michael, he's being hit with this criticism, instead of addressing actually, that's not true. Actually, here are 4 examples where I was decisive. Here's another example where I was decisive and it was unpopular. And so you've forgotten about that. So what you're saying is not true. And here are reasons why. He said, okay, here's a tough decision for you. You suck. Is that clear enough for you? There's a joke in there too. So not addressing what he's saying, just going straight to an argument. And there is something childish about this, and kind of it's like we are reverting back to our inner child. We kind of know in from an evolutionary sense, it's interesting because I do have a degree in psychology, so I'm to some extent, and I guess an expert, just a bachelor's, not a master's or a PhD. That of course is in philosophy. But my understanding is the neocortex and the parts of our brain, that evolved last are really, those are the ones that are responsible for this kind of rationality, logic, being able to think about how our future actions will play out, being able to kind of keep our instincts and emotions in check. All of this developed much later. And if you look at other animals who aren't as evolved, they don't have this neocortex or this prefrontal cortex or whatever the exact part of the brain is called. They have to rely more on instincts and more on this kind of emotional based system. There's talk of the mammalian brain and the reptilian brain. And if you can almost you go kind of deeper, it's almost like the layers of it, kind of like the outer layer, I think it might be around here. That one developed last, and that's where kind of our rationality happens. There's a lot of mystery in neuroscience, by the way. But then if you go kind of deeper and deeper, you get the mammalian brain and then the reptilian brain, which is like closer to the brain stem. And then it's almost just kind of like knee-jerk reaction. And it's easy to revert back to that emotional state. It's like we revert back to childhood. And it's like a child human is almost closer to, a non-human animal, than an adult is. There are different kinds of ad hominem. So this is a general kind of ad hominem where you're just attacking the person. So, oh, by the way, this is Latin for, at the man or to the man. So you just, you're not responding to their point or their logic or their argument. Instead, you're going after them. In this case, you're going after their circumstances. So circumstantial ad hominem, that's when you dismiss what someone's saying, their view, their position, their argument, and you think it's because of the circumstances they're coming from. Or you think you dismiss it because of their circumstances. And you do this because you believe that because of where they're coming from, because of their circumstances, they are too biased to think straight. You're going to dismiss it on the assumption that the person is biased. And that, I think that might have been a little bit confusing to you, but these examples should clear it up. Let's say you're having a debate with someone about Catholicism. Maybe they're Catholic, maybe they're not. And so currently in the Roman Catholic Church, there are priests, but they must be men. So women are not allowed to be priests, at least in the Roman Catholic faith. There are, almost too many to count branches of Christianity. And there are female priests and pastors in all sorts of different ones, Episcopalian, Lutheran, non-denominational, blah, blah, the list goes on and on. But in kind of traditional Roman Catholicism, only men. And then maybe someone says otherwise. It's like, hey, that's same-sexist, maybe. And then maybe someone says, no, I think this, they could do a little bit of argument from tradition. And then maybe this person comes up with some kind of argument for why it should be priests. I don't know. God is, maybe they think God is a man or something. And so the priest is kind of like, I don't know, whatever it is. So they give some argument. But instead of addressing that, the person says, well, of course, you think only men should be a priest. You're a man. So you're automatically kind of biased, and you are, what's the term? You are invalidated. You're disqualified. That's the word I was looking for. So you're automatically disqualified on this topic because we need to hear people who are neutral, and you're not. Or, of course, you think the minimum wage should be raised. You're a minimum wage worker. So the issue, should we raise the minimum wage? What should it be? $10, $15 an hour, $20 an hour? And we need to ask people who are neutral, if you ask people who are doing the work, they have an interest in this. And so it's going to be hard for them to be neutral. So of course they're going to argue that it should be raised, but it's too easy for that to be out of self-interest. But the problem here is, yes, people can be biased, and part of this, one of the functions of this part of the course is to be mindful of these cognitive biases. However, just because there's a chance that they will be influenced by self-interest or by their circumstances or by bias, it's not fair to automatically disqualify them and to say, no matter what argument you come up with, I'm going to dismiss it no matter what. That's unfair, because they could actually come up with a perfectly valid argument or strong argument. And it's too quick. If you dismiss it outright, you might have maybe some grounds to be leery of what they say, take it with a grain of salt, But hey, isn't there a decent chance they could come up with something reasonable? Like you're saying, it's impossible that they can, so people can maybe set aside their self-interest. You saying that's impossible? That's too strong. So that's the problem. Here's another one. So we have a new Supreme Court Justice, Jackson, and there's a hyphenation in there. Kendi Jackson. I'm getting the name mixed up, but anyway, we have a new Supreme Court Justice, and that person was nominated by Biden and was confirmed by the Senate. And this was one of the promises that Biden made before the position was available. So he made this promise to nominate a Black woman to the Supreme Court. And suppose you were talking to someone about, is this a good idea to make a promise like that? So some opponents might say, why not make a promise that you will just, when a position comes up, you look for the best person to fill that position. So there's a need for a Supreme Court justice, and you need to have certain qualities to do that job well. You interview a bunch of people, and the people who fulfill those qualities the best, that's the person that you go with. So someone might make an argument like that. And then there might be a reply. Well, yeah, there's something to that meritorious argument, but don't forget about diversity and inclusion of different kinds of voices, and this kind of shapes the law. And so ensuring diversity also has merit. Okay, so that's the back and forth so far. And then the original person, instead of replying to that, they say, well, I'm just going to automatically disqualify what you're saying. I mean, you are a Black woman, so of course you're biased. I can't believe a word out of your mouth because it's kind of in your self-interest to defend Biden's promise. So again, it's not that there isn't something to that. Yes, it's good to keep in mind where people are coming from, sure, but it's that you take that a little too far. That's the problem here, is you can't be that dismissive that quickly. And so that's what's going on here. And then finally, another kind of, let's see here. So we have three more fallacies, and we'll practice, and then we'll wrap this up. So here's another kind of ad hominem. So we just have kind of ad hominem in general, which is just attacking a person, insulting a person instead of addressing their points. We have rejecting what someone's saying because we think automatically dismissing them because we think they're too biased or too self-interested. And then here we have what's sometimes called inconsistency ad hominem, which is also known by this Latin phrase, which has a funny sounding name, tu quo qui, tu quo qui, tu quo qui, tu quo qui. Kind of hard to say, tu quo qui. So here are some examples. Weight Watchers, you're going to go, or now I guess now it's just called WW because just the idea of weight is such a hot topic that let's just call it WW. We don't want people to think about weight. It's too triggering for people. So Weight Watchers are now WW. That system doesn't work. Look at the person who's kind of the owner now. Look at Oprah. She is the spokesperson and majority stakeholder in WW, and her weight has notoriously yo-yoed, and currently she's not doing as great as she might want. So it won't work. Or how about this question? Let's say that you are going to hire a housekeeper, and usually you wouldn't find this information out, but suppose you found out that one of the people you interviewed for the housekeeper job, maybe you interview them at their house and you look around, it's like their house is pretty messy. Would that make you think twice about hiring them? Would it make you think twice about joining WW when you know that the person who has tried it has kind of had some success, but not currently successful. Let's say that you are shopping around for therapists, and one in particular that you kind of like, you find out that they have a lot of mental health issues. So again, it's not that there's something to consider for all of these. You know, it might be that this is we should proceed with caution about going with the system or thinking that it's a good program. Proceed with a little bit of caution. Ooh, okay, maybe think a little bit twice about hiring this person or hiring this therapist. The fallacy is when you go from a little bit of caution to, nope, they're out. No way this works. No way this person's a good housekeeper. No way this person's a good therapist. And that's the mistake. You've gone too far. And you're kind of doing it in the name of logic. Your argument is sort of like, the person's a hypocrite, and so there's no way what they're selling or what they're advancing is going to work. So these are the examples. In general, just because someone's a hypocrite, it doesn't negate their point. We have a tu quoque fallacy on the field. Or in other words, it occurs when a position or argument is dismissed. Again, it's not the thinking twice about what they're saying. It's the automatic full dismissal. That's the problem. And that's what was going on with circumstantial ad hominem as well. It's the full dismissal, not just caution, but full dismissal of an inconsistency between what the person is saying and what they have done or are currently doing. Just because someone doesn't, as to coin a phrase or to use the phrase, just because someone doesn't practice what they preach doesn't automatically mean that their view or their argument is defective. So looking at these two examples, maybe the fact that the housekeeper has a messy home, maybe that increases the chances that they won't be the best housekeeper. But however, we have to admit the possibility that maybe they're really good at cleaning for money, but they're really bad at cleaning at home when they're not paid, right? Or maybe they're so busy cleaning other people's houses that they don't have time to clean their own. Same thing with the therapist. Maybe it makes them an even better therapist because they're intimately, and maybe they're treating you for anxiety or depression. And maybe the fact that they have dealt with it themselves, that gives them an insider's perspective on it. Or maybe they have anxiety and depression, but maybe when they are in therapy sessions, maybe that's what helps. Maybe in those moments, they don't feel the depression or anxiety at all. And maybe they're quite good. So to automatically dismiss these people, it's too fast. It's unfair. And, maybe, first of all, Oprah has been successful on WW. You can look, you can find it online. She's had points where she's, lost a lot of weight or been healthier using that program. So maybe it's not so much and when she, when she's less successful, I'm using euphemisms here, right? Maybe that's it's not so much the program's fault. Maybe that's her own willpower or something. Okay. We have straw man, red herring, and then we'll practice and then I'll be done. Okay. Straw man, or sometimes known as a straw figure argument. This is where you take what someone's saying, you take their point, you take their argument, and you twist it, you distort it, you water it down, you exaggerate it, you attack a cartoon version of it, a caricature of it, instead of addressing their actual argument or point. By the way, the opposite of this, and this is like a good practice, a debate practice, or just logical practice, is when you are trying to think through a position, an argument that you take issue with or that you disagree with, first of all, try to understand what they are saying. Try to say back to the person, if you're doing it kind of person to person. So someone argues something, and you, instead of just initially doing a knee-jerk reaction, you pause and you say, well, let me restate what I think you just said. And you think that would be the easiest thing in the world, but it turns out it's very difficult. So what happens oftentimes, if you say, here, so let me see if I'm hearing you clearly, and you reiterate the argument. And a lot of times they'll say, oh, you got it 80% right, but I didn't quite say this one thing. So first, get it right. And if you don't do that, then everything that you've come up with is some straw man version of the argument. And then if you really want to come up with a great counter argument, then try, just for practice, take their argument and make it even stronger. So beef it up. So that's the steel man. So take it, and instead of weakening it down to like a straw figure version of like a straw man, like you'd put to scare the crows in a field, is just like a shell of a person. It's just like it's not a real person. It just kind of looks like a person. And so a straw man argument, it's not the real argument. It just sort of looks like it bears some resemblance, but isn't. It's a distortion of it. A steel man, you take a person and turn him into like a Superman or a steel man, and then you're making the argument even stronger, and then come up with a good counter to that, and then you'll be in a really great place. So what are some examples of these? Let's say two people in a relationship, and one is saying, you're on your phone too much. You should limit your screen time. And then the reply is, so you're saying I'm addicted to my phone? They're twisting the words, right? So the point of the argument is, the point or the conclusion of the argument is, hey, I've noticed on observation, you're on your phone a lot, maybe more than you realize. And then they're taking what they're reading this as, you're saying I'm addicted. No, I didn't say you're addicted, right? Because maybe you could be, a lot of people aren't addicted, but they're still on their phones too much. So this is exaggerating what the person is saying. So here's a straw man from Trump. We're going to save our Second Amendment. Hillary Clinton wants to abolish it. Believe me, she wants to abolish the Second Amendment. We're going to save our Second Amendment. You could research this. It's an empirical claim, but I would highly doubt that Clinton, it's wants to, like if she had her way, would she get rid of it? I don't even know if I would buy that, but certainly that there's no, it's just, look at what is her actual claims. Like he didn't quote her. People said this about Obama too, that if you vote for Obama, you vote for Hillary, the Second Amendment will be abolished. Well, we had 8 years of Obama. I believe gun sales went up, so Second Amendment made it. So that's a distortion of whatever Clinton said. Maybe she said, we need gun reform or something, and he twisted gun reform into you're gonna have no Second Amendment. Just like, oh, we want police reform. Oh, they're gonna get rid of all the police. So that's a straw man. I'll skip over this one. We're running out of time. Okay, and we'll end with this red herring. So when you are having a debate with someone, and instead of you bring up a good point, and maybe you bring a good point, and instead of them addressing that, they change the subject, or they in some sense divert attention away from the point that you made. Usually it's because you've made a good point and they know it, and they don't have a good comeback for it. This happens in like presidential debates all the time. They make a good point, or they bring up something that is a touchy subject, and the less that it's talked about, the better. And so they will deflect. That's an example of a red herring. So a distraction to divert attention from the original point to something. And a lot of times the thing that, you could change course or divert attentions really to anything, but it's an even more powerful maneuver when you divert to something that's pretty close to what the point they made, close enough that an audience member who's not astute enough, they might not even notice it. So it kind of sounds like they have a retort and they haven't, because if you change the subject too much and people will be like, whoa, but what about, they were talking about climate change and now you're talking about guns again. Like, what, are you going to talk about their point? So if you bring up something that sounds like it's in the same vein or domain, that can work even better. Let's look at an example to clear this up.
The question from Patrice was about, are you both modeling positive and appropriate behaviors for today's youth? We received a lot of questions online, Mr. Trump, about the tape that was released on Friday. As you can imagine, you called what you said locker room banter. You described kissing women without consent, grabbing their genitals. That is sexual assault. You bragged that you have sexually assaulted women. Do you understand that?
All right. So this was like a historic moment in this presidential election, in this debate. And so this was the Access Hollywood tape that went viral, and people thought, this has got to be, there's no way Trump can recover from this. Presidential campaigns have been demolished by 1/100th of a November surprise, because this was late in the campaign. There's no way he's going to recover. And so this is the first debate where everyone, not everyone, but like these are watched by millions of people. Everyone, in a sense, a lot of eyes on Trump. Anderson Cooper just asked him directly about, it wasn't even, did you say this? Because the tape was just kind of so clear. There's video and audio. It's Trump's voice. So he's going to use a red herring. Like he wants to get off this topic as fast as he can. So he could address it. I mean, he could say like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm imperfect. It was disgusting. And I'm in therapy for it. Or I don't know. Like he could just have a very sincere, long explanation. But see if you can spot the red herring or the diversion.
No, I didn't say that at all. I don't think you understood what was said. This was locker room talk. I'm not proud of it. I apologize to my family. I apologize to the American people. Certainly, I'm not proud of it. But this is locker room talk. When we have a world where you have ISIS chopping off heads, where you have, and frankly, drowning people in steel cages, where you have wars and horrible, horrible sights all over, where you have so many bad things happening. This is like medieval times. We haven't seen anything like this, the carnage all over the world. And they look and they see. Can you imagine the people that are frankly doing so well against us with ISIS? And they look at our country and they see what's going on. Yes, I'm very embarrassed by it. I hate it. But it's locker room talk, and it's one of those things. I will knock the hell out of ISIS. We're going to defeat ISIS. ISIS happened a number of years ago in a vacuum that was left because of bad judgment.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, obviously his team prepared him for this. So he knew he was going to get that question. And so this was their strategy. So first there was, I guess there was just a full-on denial. Kind of said, no, I didn't say it, or I didn't, that's not right. And then there was the rhetorical strategy of what's called downplaying. And when he used, remember we talked about euphemisms. So, these celebrities, they fawn on you so much, you could do whatever you want, and then it was the grab them by the P word, grab the genitals. So that's pretty lewd. That's pretty. I remember seeing that report, and it was just like, whoa, like, man, like, I mean, I guess there was the Monica Lewinsky thing with Clinton. That was pretty gnarly, but in terms of language, getting like a hot tape, yeah, that was something else. So there was downplaying, and that's a euphemism. So locker room talk, that's a euphemism for grabbing somebody by the genital. I mean, it's just hard. I can't even say it with a straight face. It's just so crazy. And then so did you see the deflection? What was the red herring, the diversion? He just kind of out of the blue starts talking about ISIS and chopping off heads, it's like, forget this Access Hollywood tape. What about terrorism and ISIS? I guess I kind of see the connection. I think he was kind of saying, like, we got bigger fish to fry. Okay, yes, I had this moment where I said something very lewd, but in the grand scheme of things, this is small potatoes, low stakes, and I want to turn our attention to things that really matter. Me saying this silly thing on a bus, I'm really trying to be charitable here. And so I'm trying to steel man a little bit. We shouldn't focus. We're focusing too much on this kind of hot tape. Is that what's called? Hot mic. That's what it was. Hot mic moment, kind of a Trump gate, caught you on tape, gotcha moment. And really, when you zoom out, yes, it's very viral and people love to gossip and it gets a lot of attention. But what we should really pay attention to are these really serious problems. So we could have talked about, I don't know, like climate change or, nuclear countries with potential nuclear threats, Iran or something, or North Korea, or, Russia these days. But he went with ISIS and terrorism. So yeah, that was a big red herring. An attempt to distract from the main issue by bringing up irrelevant information. So we brought up ISIS and terrorism. Mom says, it's time to do your homework. And the kid said, we had lunch for pizza today. That's a great red herring. Like, doesn't want to do his homework. Trump doesn't want to talk about that tape. We're running out of time, so let's just jump to practicing these things. So 3, 2, 1, and 3, 2, 2. Okay, so here's 3, 2, 1. Erica Evans, who takes orders at the local Taco Bell, argues persuasively in favor of increasing the minimum wage. So we kind of did this one already. But this is exactly what you would expect. Erica's paid minimum wage. And if the minimum wage is increased, then her own salary will go up. Obviously, Erica's arguments are worthless. So this is circumstantial ad hominem. The school board argues that our schools are in desperate need of repair. But the real reason our students are falling behind is they spend too much time on their smartphones. Being educated is learning more than how to scroll. School board should send a letter to parents urging them to take their kids' phones. So here's a diversion. That's a red herring, right? So the issue is, do they need repair? And he pivots to smartphone. People glued to their smartphones. So that's a red herring. Issue is about school being in need of repair. They change the subject to smartphone usage. Let's do this one. Senator Barrow advocates increased Social Security benefits for the poor. It is regrettable that the senator finds it necessary to advocate socialism. Okay, so this seems to be a distortion. So increasing Social Security benefits, that's one thing, but saying that's the same thing as socialism, that is an exaggeration. That is a straw man version. You're taking someone's claim and then you are if you exaggerate it or twist it or distort it, it's a straw man. So then he goes on to say how bad socialism is. Socialism defeats initiative, takes away promised rewards, leads directly to inefficiency, big government. It's tried for years in Eastern Europe and it failed miserably. Clearly, socialism no good. Increased Social Security benefits. I mean, maybe like there's it's loosely tied, I guess, like some democratic socialism or, full-blown socialism is miles away from just having a Social Security benefit. 10 here. Giving ridiculous reasons, the editor of Daily Register have accused our company of being one of the city's worst water polluters. But the Daily Register is responsible for much more pollution than we are. After all, they own the Western Paper Company, and that company discharges tons of chemical residue into the city's river every day. So the issue is whether or not this company is a bad polluter in the city. And instead of them saying, here's a bunch of evidence that shows that we don't pollute, they just kind of turn it around and say, no, you pollute. You pollute. So that is saying that that's a tu quo qui. Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you about this part. So tu quo qui is Latin for you too. So the inconsistency here is, the hypocrisy rather is, how can this company say that we are polluters when they are polluters? They're being inconsistent. They're basically saying, like, this is the old saying, parents say this to their kids a lot. They're saying, do as I say, not as I do. But there's a hypocrisy there. So if a parent says, catches a kid smoking or drinking, they say, hey, cut that out. And then, but maybe the parent themselves maybe smokes and drinks a little too much. If the kid, instead of admitting that they did get caught, if they just kind of say, but you smoke and you drink, and so you have no right to tell me to not. And there's something to that there, there's a saying, it's a case of something like the pot calling the kettle black. Like maybe there's a bit of irony there, but just because the parent might be a hypocrite, it doesn't mean that they are wrong to call the kid out on their I mean, a kid or teenager or something, on them drinking or smoking. The parent might say, look, it's bad for your health. It's addictive and it can ruin relationships. So that's an argument. Conclusion, don't drink and smoke that much. And if the kid just ignores that argument and says, you're a hypocrite, then that's an invalid move. And it's an example of the tu quo qui, the you too fallacy. All right, almost done here. Surely architect Norris is not responsible for the collapse of the central bank tower. Norris has nothing but trouble lately. His daughter eloped with a child molester, his son committed suicide, and his alcoholic wife recently left for Las Vegas with his retirement savings. This is another red herring, but there's this element of pity, isn't there? We should feel bad. So okay, so the issue is, did this architect, is this architect responsible for the collapse of this bank tower? Yes or no? Well, the person doesn't address that empirical claim. Doesn't present evidence either way. It's just, we should feel bad for him because I shouldn't laugh at this, but because of these very unfortunate things that have happened to him of late. So there is a red herring in here, I would say, as well. But it's another good example is, with these fallacies, it doesn't have to be A or B. It can be both. You can pile on the fallacies. So I would say there's a distraction here, and they are the emotion that they are using to distract is one of pity. So I would add to this also red herring. This person's personal troubles are completely have nothing to do with whether or not he was responsible for this. Again, maybe loosely it's like, well, it depends on the timeline, right? Like when this person was drawing up the plans, were they going through all these things? You know, then you would have more of an argument, but nothing of that is said. Okay, just 3 or 4 more here. Professor Peterson's argument in favor of the theory of evolution should be discounted. Pearson is a cocaine-snorting sex pervert, and according to some reports, a member of the Communist Party. So this is just ad hominem. This is just ad hominem. Argument against the person. So that's what ad hominem is Latin for. They give no reason why their theory is faulty. They just attack the person. All right. And okay, that was 3, 2, 1. And let's just do a few, I think 1 or 2 from, 2 more. From 3, 2, 2. True or false? In the strawman fallacy, an arguer often distorts another person's argument by making it look more extreme than it really is. Absolutely. Yeah. That's a fine definition or description of the strawman fallacy. In the red herring fallacy, the arguer attempts to lead the reader or listener off the track. Yeah, absolutely. By diverting the attention. So both of these are perfectly fine descriptions of the strawman fallacy and red herring fallacy, respectively. So those are both true. All right. That was a bit longer than I wanted. But that's all I have for you for this video lecture. So thanks for hanging out, and I will see you next time.